Good evening, everybody. Great to have you all here. I'm Dennis Nally, Chairman of PricewaterhouseCoopers International, and thanks for joining us this evening. It's really great to see some old faces and obviously some new faces as well in the audience, so great to have you all here. I also want to extend a really special welcome to those participating via the webcast, and feel free to send in questions which we'll answer at the end of this short presentation. But before I get into the results of the survey itself, I also want to thank more than 1,300 CEOs that actually participated in this year's survey. In fact, it's our 17th annual survey. And to the 34 in particular who made the extra time to sit down with us and really give us some of the color commentary that I think really makes the survey results come alive. Also, several of our global leaders are here with us tonight, and they're available to answer your questions as well. So let me introduce them. First, Bob Moritz from the US, Ian Powell from the UK, Norbert Winkel-Johann from Germany, and Cassie Wang from China. So feel free to direct any specific questions that you may have to them as well. So I'll briefly take you through the highlights, key findings in terms of what's in our survey results, and then we'll, as I said, take some of your questions. And if you're looking for specific country data, we have over 20 cuts to the survey results, so hopefully we can answer some of those questions as well that I know are of interest to you. So let's get right into it. The global economic recovery continues to be fragile, as we all know. But with immediate pressures really beginning to ease, CEOs are feeling much more optimistic and gradually switching from what we would describe as the survival mode to the growth mode. So that's the good news. The survey revealed that CEO confidence about the global economy is definitely on the rise. In fact, 44% of the CEOs believe that the global economy will actually improve over the next 12 months. And that's more than double than last year. Interestingly, only 7% of the CEOs, that's right, 7% of the CEOs compared to 28% last year, think that things will actually get worse this year. So we would describe this as a major turnaround in confidence levels between the 2 years. The optimism, I think, is also evidenced in the way CEOs are actually viewing their own prospects for growth with their own companies. Nearly 40% of the CEOs said that they're very confident that their company's revenues will actually grow in 2014. And that's up from about 36% last year, though it's still below the 52% that we saw in 2007. So things are better, but they're not where they were pre-financial crisis. And of course, as we all know, CEOs' confidence is very much dependent upon and influenced by where their company is actually located. CEOs in the Middle East, for example, were the most confident, with nearly 70% stating they were very confident about short-term revenue growth. And that's contrasted to CEOs in Latin America, where we saw a 10% decrease to 43%, and in Western Europe, where 30%, which is the lowest in our survey, said they were very confident of revenue growth. However, the positive news here is that it's up from 22% from last year. So again, CEOs in Western Europe feeling more confident. You know, what's really interesting as well is when you step back and think about it, CEOs are actually more optimistic about the global economy than they are about their own company's growth prospects over the next 12 months. And I'll come back to this in a couple of minutes. On a country level, Russia topped the list of CEO confidence, followed by Mexico, with France and Argentina at the bottom. Some of the major changes to highlight from last year. US at 36%, which is up from 30% last year. The UK, which is at 27%, up from 22% last year. And China at 48%, which is up from 40% a year ago. And while India at 49%, that's actually down from 63% just 12 months ago. Last year, as we all know, the advanced economies were struggling, while the emerging economies were surging. This year, the exact opposite is true. The advanced economies are beginning to mend, and growth in some of the emerging economies, as we all know, is decelerating. And we look at industry sectors. CEOs most confident about their company revenue growth over the next 12 months come from hospitality and leisure, banking and capital markets, as well as retail. CEOs are actually feeling good about hiring plans as well, with 50% of CEOs planning to add staff in the year ahead, and that's up from about 45% last year. Things are looking most positive for jobs in the technology as well as in the services sectors. But interestingly, nearly 2/3 of the CEOs, that's right, 2/3, remain concerned about finding the right people and having them in the right spots. And that's the highest it's ever been since we've been tracking this in 2009, which is up from 46%. And of course, as we all know, while technology advances will make it easier and harder to find skilled workers, there's no question that CEOs are growing increasingly concerned about the talent issue. So overall, we would say it's fragile optimism. Certainly a glass half full, although CEOs still have a number of major concerns. First, overregulation, which is a perennial, as we all know in this room on the survey. It actually topped the list this year, cited by 72% of the respondents. In fact, this year, worries about the impact of regulation overtook economic concerns. First time we've seen that since we've been doing the survey. And maybe this begins to explain the disconnect that I mentioned earlier, where CEOs actually seem to be more optimistic about the global economic picture than their own company's prospects. Nearly 80% of the CEOs, that's right, 80%, said regulation had actually increased their costs, and 40% said regulation had inhibited their company's ability to grow or to form new business ventures. Also interestingly, the ability of debt-laden governments to tackle soaring deficits also continues to be one of the biggest concerns on the CEO's agenda, with over 70% citing this concern. Again, it's the highest level we've seen since doing the survey. And this score actually goes to 92% for CEOs in the US, and it's the highest level of any country around the world. Maybe not a surprise. Other top CEO concerns included slowing growth in both developed economies as well as the high growth markets, and the possibility of increased taxes. On taxes, specifically, CEOs said that the international tax system desperately needs an overhaul. 2/3 said that the tax system needs a reform, but just over a quarter said that they had faith in the current OECD efforts to actually succeed in this regard. So CEOs are clearly challenged to decipher some of the really mixed signals about the global economy. Our findings show that nearly 1/3 of them are focused on opportunities for growth in countries where they already do business, with just 14% planning to explore new geographic markets. Many are also reviewing their portfolio of overseas markets, where they concentrate their efforts. And also very interesting, CEOs are saying that the BRICS, which historically have evolved together, are now evolving in a much more individual way. There's no longer a single bloc. This feeling was echoed by CEOs from the BRIC countries regarding their short-term growth. In terms of being very confident about the revenues over the next 12 months, all decreased, that's right, all decreased from last year with the exception of the CEOs from China. CEOs are now assessing prospects for new business in countries such as Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, Thailand, as well as Vietnam. Meanwhile, and interestingly, the US, the UK, and Germany were also listed highly as investment destinations as the developed economies really begin to show signs of recovery. Now, CEOs are also anticipating a number of seismic shifts on the horizon. They told us that they believe that 3 global trends: number 1, technological advances; 2, demographic changes; and 3, shifts in economic power would have a significant impact on their businesses over the next 5 years. And when CEOs were asked what they thought would be the next big thing that would revolutionize society, business, or their industry in the next 10 years, technology was their top pick. To anticipate, 9 out of 10 are actually changing their technology investments. But there's a glaring gap between aspiration as well as execution. 90% of the CEOs told us they're changing their technology investments, and a little more have made a quarter of a way of any headway in getting grips with big data, which is of real concern. Almost 2/3 of the CEOs think their R&D function is actually insufficiently prepared to capitalize on the trends that are now transforming their business. One impact or one concern that's holding them back is that newer technologies could actually negate their effects. CEOs are actually worried about the speed in which technology is advancing. And finally, getting on the wrong side, as we all know, has major consequences. Investments in customer growth as well as retention strategies, people development as well as risk management were also high on the CEO's action plans. Quite simply, CEOs are telling us that they see everything in a state of flux, from where people live and work to the wider social as well as political context in which companies interact with their stakeholders. So this raises the question for them that whether or not they should act, but the more important question is how quickly they should really act to adapt to these new strategies. Finally, I'd emphasize one other consequence continuing to worry CEOs around the world, and that's the expectations of stakeholders, specifically regarding restoring trust in business. Loss of trust, as we all know, is certainly not limited to the business world. There's a growing gap of trust in society overall. For example, the data security breaches that we're all familiar with, concerns about government spying, loss of confidence in products, and the list can go on and on and on. Businesses or individuals that earn a high degree of trust will survive crises much more effectively than those with low degrees of trust. But to build trust, 3/4 of the CEOs pointed to the need for much more transparency and increased reporting on non-financial data that they believe will be essential to long-term success. They also noted that companies should take steps to promote ethical behavior and ensure the integrity of their supply chains. And not surprisingly, when the subject turns to trust, CEOs specifically targeted the decline in trust amongst governments, regulators, and business, one that they believe creates increasing uncertainty and subsequently puts a real brake on the growth as well as the economic recovery. So these are some of the highlights of the PwC's 17th Annual CEO Survey. The good news, as I emphasized, the changes CEOs that are making to their organizations now have less to do with sheltering from the economic headwinds and more to do with actually preparing for the future, and that's the good news. The more than doubling the number of CEOs who believe that the global economy will actually improve over the next 12 months is definitely encouraging. Yet beyond the more immediate concerns about overregulation and tax reform, CEOs see a host of new challenges on the horizon that they must address, driven by technological advances, demographic changes, and the shifts in economic power. And quite frankly, they would tell you they're not as prepared to meet these challenges as they need to be, as they want to be. So there's plenty more detailed information in the survey results. It's available in hard copy. Hopefully you've got a copy of that, and also on pwc.com. So thanks for your attention, and I want to particularly thank those on the webcast that have joined us this evening. So now let's open the floor for questions. Yeah.
Deborah Burling from O Globo, the Brazilian newspaper. Well, Brazilian CEOs, not Brazilian CEOs, world CEOs seem to be less confident about short-term revenue growth in Brazil. And I see the same happens to India, to Russia, but not with China. Does that mean that the BRICS have reached a threshold?
I think
with the exception of China?
Yeah, I think it begins to acknowledge that each of the BRICS countries, which, as I indicated in my remarks, historically have moved relatively in the same direction, as those economies really develop. And I think what you're really seeing as those economies continue to advance, they're all at a different stage of the journey in terms of their future development. So the facts or the issues that Brazil is dealing with, or that India is dealing with, or other countries, Africa, et cetera, need to be really understood and focused on. But it does begin to explain the unique aspects of those developing territories. And as I said in my remarks, that's one of the major changes this year versus a year ago. It's actually a switch, a flip. So whether or not that becomes a longer-term pattern, time will tell. But as you know, some of the headwinds that Brazil is facing, with debt, slower growth, some of the issues that India are facing, for example, the new elections, upcoming elections in the March, April time period, et cetera, are impacting the CEO's views and attitudes about the prospects in the short term. And I think it's just going to be a matter of time to watch to see how it all plays out. Other questions? Yeah.
Hello, Angela from Sina.com in China. I noticed that you mentioned in the near future, all the CEOs will seek new opportunities in some new emerging economies, such as Mexico or Indonesia. But at the same time, we can say that CEOs in those countries, in fact, they're not confident enough as well. And there's some rumors or some predictions that in these countries, maybe they will not be as stable as people thought they would be. So what's your opinion about this? Thank you.
Well, I think there's a number of newer, emerging or developing economies that were cited in the survey. Whether it's Indonesia, the Vietnam, the Philippines, Mexico, as you point out, all of which are very unique, all of which require, to really understand, the specifics around those economies, what their policies are, how business is going to be conducted in those respective economies, the risks really understood, et cetera. And I think that's just one of the aspects of making sure that, before investments are really made, that there's a clear understanding, of the total profile of those individual or newer emerging economies. I think what CEOs are saying, though, when you step back and ask the question, why are they interested in these economies? And it really goes to the potential for the development of significant middle class, in those individual countries, and continuing with the development of those economies, the creation of those middle classes, which are going to create just significant opportunities for growth. And that's one of the reasons why they're so much interested in a number of those economies. Okay.
Luca Gaballo, Rai News 24, Italian television. I find a bit confusion the picture about the relationship toward the government and taxes. I don't understand it very well because government seems to be the more lethal menace, according to CEOs, and taxation must be overhauled. CEOs think they fear tax increases, but they also say that multinationals should pay taxes in full and disclose all their data. Could you clarify this point?
Well, the tax debate is an interesting debate. It's complex, first off, as we all know. CEOs in the survey would acknowledge that there is a real need to pay their fair share of taxes. I think, as we all know, as these country tax systems were developed over many, many, many years, they were developed with certain intention, goals, policies in effect. So, for example, when a country puts in, incentives to, locate investment, creation of jobs, et cetera, clearly that's a part of the economic and fiscal policy that country was looking at. When the work that's being done by the OECD to really look at this question, to really update a lot of these dated rules and regulations, the bottom line is there's going to be potentially winners and losers in that process. And we all know that notwithstanding the goodwill that goes into that process, this is all about creating competitive positions and policies for countries that have to compete for investment, for jobs, et cetera. And I think that's one of the reasons why the CEOs were not as positive that this effort was going to produce a result that really would bring the international tax system up to the current 21st century. I personally don't see we ought to give it a chance to see if it can work. It's clearly dated, but I think when you look at this on a country by country basis and you expect major changes or reforms, you're going to have winners and losers in that process. And I think that's just the reality of the challenges that exist in terms of what's going on there. Maybe go all the way to back here, if we could. Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, come back, okay.
Hi, Simon Demican from
Yeah.
Bloomberg. I'd like to talk about overall CEO sentiment about Fed tapering. Did you talk to them about, whether they're going to delay their investment plans or anything like that?
Not a specific question in the survey. I think, though, when you start to understand what's happening with confidence levels with CEOs in different parts of the world, particularly the developed world versus the developing world, the impacts of tapering clearly have had an effect on certain economies around the world. I think that's been factored into confidence levels that's coming through. But we didn't ask a specific question. Maybe next year in the survey we'll get focused on that one, depending upon how it all comes out. Okay, in the back of the room, please.
Hi, I'm Fred Fetterspiel with Awareness Metrics, and I'm very interested in the top concern from the CEOs in your survey was on overregulation. And given the fact that the regulations predominantly harm small companies and startups, could you say something a little about the mix of companies that you surveyed in your survey? Is it predominantly giant companies, or does it include smaller?
No,
Operations?
it's a great point. In fact, in the survey itself, there's a pretty good array of the companies, size of companies, location of companies, and what we really try to do is get a pretty balanced perspective, coming from the large, the small, the middle market, et cetera, in all parts of the world. And with the size of the survey that we have, I think we've got a pretty good feel for the views coming from the CEO community. What's interesting about that point, though, is that this is not, the overregulation issue is not, just dealing with one segment of that population. It's really cited by the largest, the smallest, the medium size, et cetera, in terms of what's really holding the growth agenda back, the investment agenda back. So it's applicable to all. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, okay.
Hi. So the survey highlighted Britain as one of the top CEO picks for growth prospects in 2014. I mean, would you describe Britain as a safe haven now for investment? And also, can you talk a bit more about why Britain is in favour now?
I can't think of a better person to answer that question but Ian Powell, our leader of the UK practice. Ian?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, for quite a long time now, UK CEOs have expressed a private view that they feel much more confident about the outlook. But it's interesting, in this survey, they've suddenly decided that they're going to become much more public in their views. I think it stems back to the fact that UK CEOs generally felt that they acted really early at the start of the recession to make sure that their businesses were fit for the recession, but also to make sure that they'd got liquidity in their business as well. So in the UK, what you've seen is consumer confidence starting to grow. And everybody knows that can be kind of frothy as regards sort of future growth. But I think what it has done, it's injected some confidence into the economy. So UK businesses that have now got liquidity are prepared to start to invest. So you're now starting to see investor confidence coming into the UK. I thought it was a really interesting stat. As Dennis put up on the slide, I think it said that UK CEOs, 27% of them, were very confident of revenue growth in the short term. Actually, when you add together confident and very confident, it's 93%. So 93% of UK CEOs do feel as though the economy has turned. They do feel much more confident to start to invest. And in direct response to the question, do I believe that the UK is a stable, sort of attractive place? I do. And certainly UK CEOs are starting to express that view as well. So the UK CEOs kind of feel the same pressures that everybody else. Regulation came out as one of the big issues. Talent and recruiting the right people and keeping the right people and making sure that they were equipped for the market was one of the real key issues for them as well. But yeah, so I think UK is definitely starting to show confidence and seems a stable place to invest.
Other questions? Yeah.
Philippe Lefebvre, France Inter, French radio. A simple question: is France still in your map?
Yes, France is still in the map. The CEOs are still participating in the survey. They still have acknowledged the challenges that exist with the recovery in France, but still very very much an important part of our what's taking place here. Yeah. Okay. There's a question that just came in from the internet. It seems that there is a consensus that 2014 will see an improved global economy. Do you anticipate CEOs taking this opportunity to invest in growth, or will they be willing to take profits? Interesting question. Bob, you want to take a stab at that?
So it's a great question that I think is very tailored to the company. When you look at the individual organizations that were participated in the survey, you've got some companies that did a very good job, as Ian talked about in the UK, for example, of taking care of and putting the mechanisms in place to strengthen their balance sheet, strengthen the capital reserves that they may have and the cash reserves, so they can actually then make the investments today now that they see that uprise potential. I would tell you that on other cases, though, from a competitive landscape, you've got tremendous requests for a return on capital. So as a result, every CEO, every board is in this discussion right now of what's the right mix of investment versus capital return for sake of, quote unquote, the investment opportunities as they look at their investor base. And second, very tailored investment in terms of which market and in what source. Is it going to be talent? Is it going to be capital from a manufacturing perspective in terms of new warehouses, capital facilities, and the like? Or is it going to be in some technology and innovation areas? I will tell you, as we looked, and it's in the statistics, one of the biggest challenges the CEOs have, no matter if you're looking at it from an investment perspective or from an ROI perspective, it is the pace of change that will happen and the competitive landscape that they have to operate in an innovative world. All of them have to be investing in technology. And this goes back to, for purposes of long term, as well as for short-term profitability. The challenge is right now that issue is right in front of them, and they're not capable necessarily or confident they actually can rise themselves and their management teams to the challenge.
Good. Thanks, Bob. Well done. Yeah.
Hi, this is Cem from Bloomberg, Turkey. Now, the biggest impact of the crisis was on the employment, on the workforce. Now we can see unemployment in some countries is up to 25%. I didn't get the point, the recruitment and the talent part. I mean, can you be more specific, or can you talk about it a bit more, please?
Yeah, so a really, really interesting question, because you would think that with the high levels of unemployment that still exist in many parts of the world today, how do you explain this disconnect that CEOs are really concerned about, having access to talent? I think it points to two things. First is, does the talent pool that's out there, that's available, do they have the skills necessary to really contribute to the way this economy is evolving over time? So that's number one. And I think in many cases, because of the way the economy has progressed, technology, advances, et cetera, services, et cetera, that many individuals who are not employed today don't have the skills to be effectively competing in today's economy. So I think you've got that issue. I think the second issue really goes to some of these mega trends that we were talking about, with demographic changes that are out there, the shift in economic powers from the developed world to the developing world. Do you have the right skills, the right competencies in the right places to really be competitive? So you have that issue as well. So I think it's a two-pronged point, right, which is skills, preparation of skills and development to really be competitive in this economy. And then secondly, do you have the right skills in the right locations? And I think when they look at both of those issues, that's the concerns that are being expressed. I think from our perspective, we think this is a tremendous opportunity, though, when you step back and think about it, for governments, business, educators to really work together in a very collaborative way to really start to define better the skills that are going to be necessary to be competitive into the future, and importantly, making sure that governments are putting in policies and practices that really are going to support job growth and job creation and investment. So the solution here, no silver bullet, but to me it's one that really does require a very, very collaborative effort with the key parties, key players to really address this issue from a longer term standpoint. Sure. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Stefano from Media Tenor. I wanted to just find out, just looking at the press release, it seemed like more or less CEOs in 2013 were wanting to, or are looking probably at the prospects of employing people as what it was in 2012. However, they are feeling more confident for 2014, and in addition to what we're saying now around the skills development, they do see this as an important area that they need to focus on. So why is there that disparity? Why are fewer CEOs in 2013 than 2012 in terms of focusing on or considering employing people?
Well, I just think it goes to the real issue, which is at the end of the day, some of these megatrends are going to have a significant impact on a company's workforce, whether it's demographic changes, number of retirements, the training, the skills of making sure you've got individuals who have the right capabilities to really contribute, on a go-forward basis. And that gap continues to increase. So there's an acknowledgement that the CEOs are feeling better about the prospects, the opportunities are there, but they're also looking at this as a potential challenge issue if we don't get it right. And I think that's one of the reasons what they're trying to focus on, to really try to explain that difference. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. The questions come through relating to China as one of the BRIC country where confidence in revenue has gone up. And the question is really what is driving this confidence, and is it sustainable? So it's a two-part question. I think the first question is, I'm sure that the CEO finds the right elements of growth in China. China just recently published its 2013 GDP, which is at 7.7%. Put it in perspective, it's good for a global economy that is slowly recovering, but in fact, it is one of the lowest in 14 years for China. And I believe this actually marks a very interesting point in China economic growth history, because China leadership these days are stressing on quality of growth, not just quantity of growth. And maybe later on I can explain a little bit about the quality of growth. But when I say that China has the right elements for growth, I believe that we have some very favorable trends. Demographics, rising middle class. If I give you a statistics that in US, about 70% of GDP comes from household spending. In India, it's probably about 60%. In China, it's less than 40%. So you can see that there's a huge mileage of growth, and the market is so big in China that companies cannot ignore the China growth market. If you look at urbanization in China, China no doubt has been making phenomenal, history about moving population from rural to urbanization, and this is going to continue under the new leadership direction of growth. I think also very important element for China growth is actually the state's leadership has set out a new economic reform roadmap. Personally, I'm very confident that this is going to breathe a very new life into the economic growth in China, because they are now allowing more private capital to be invested in previously restricted sectors. And also, the way that they are de-emphasizing the quantity of growth means that there's going to be more attentions putting back into the sustainability of the economy. I hope we get better air in Beijing. I hope we get cleaner water, better food, and all that. And therefore, I think that the growth agenda set out by the Chinese government really have sustainability high on it. I certainly hope it will succeed.
Good. Thanks, Cassie. Other questions? Adams? Yeah.
Right. Francis Matthew of Gulf News in Dubai. I see you're 96% in the Middle East confident or very confident, and I can understand that might be the guys in the Gulf. I doubt you had many from Syria or Iraq, but more interestingly, along Egypt and Tunisia, where countries are going through political change, how many of those respondents were from that area, the Maghreb?
Do we have the details on that in terms of the breakout by countries in the Middle East? It's for the region. But I suspect the way you've summarized it is probably true. Big difference of confidence levels in that part of the world. No question about it. I don't think we have the data to break that up. Other questions? Yeah.
Yu Tingyan from China Business News. There has been a sentiment that the developed markets have taken over the role of engine of growth, and people are becoming more optimistic about developed markets than emerging markets. But the results shows that actually there are more CEOs concerned about the sluggish growth in developed markets than about the slowdown in emerging markets. So why was that? And also, does the CEO express any concerns about the shift of the economic power and this kind of thing?
Well,
Thank you.
I think you're hitting on a number of points there. One is that let's take the shift in economic power. Clearly, one of the big trends that CEOs are very much focused on, seeing tremendous opportunities, but a lot of challenges with that, as they prepare their businesses to really compete with that shift. When you go to the first part of your question, though, I think the confidence levels that you're seeing from the CEOs as it relates to the developed markets go more hand in hand with, things are steadily, slowly, consistently improving without a lot of surprises. And I'd emphasize without a lot of surprises. Whereas in some of the developing markets, there continues to be a fair amount of volatility, a fair amount of challenges that when you start to look at the risk reward and confidence levels around that, I think that begins to influence the thought process in terms of at least how CEOs are thinking about this over the next 12 months. But I would emphasize the point that at the end, the CEOs definitely believe that the future growth opportunities are going to be coming from many of these developing markets, and with that there will be some degree, maybe a higher degree than some would want around volatility, stability, those types of issues, but that just is a factor, a consequence of really participating in the development of those markets. Yeah, one more question for the United? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the question that came through was similar to the question around human capital and maybe the mismatch. And specifically, it was around, as you think about university or college students, what advice do you have for them? And when you think about the 50-plus-year-old, what is their opportunity and prospects as they look forward for longer-term growth potential individually? And I would say I start with the latter, but they're both pretty much the same. For the 50-year-old today, when you look at some of the challenges that the CEOs are dealing with, it's all around how do I continue to innovate, change my business models and the like. So those CEOs and their management team members have to demonstrate a degree of adaptability, agility, and the ability to actually assimilate as much data and information as possible to then take better and faster decisions. And it's really important for the 50-plus-year-old to demonstrate that adaptability because business models are changing very radically. And in some cases, the CEOs and the management teams are attuned to that. In some cases, they're not, and it's happening to them, and it is very disruptive, which goes back to the latter half of the survey, if you had a chance to read it, where the CEOs are tremendously concerned around the pace of change. If you then go forward and look to those at university or specifically at colleges, and I'll take the US for example, it is going to be difficult for a college or a university student coming right out after graduation. Why is that? Because the engagement of those students is very pointed now. Organizations will be very selective in terms of who they hire. They were able to downscale. They were able to enable productivity through using technology. So they'll be very pointed on that topic. It's going to cause the kids on campus today to demonstrate they get and understand some of the skill sets that are needed to help transform customer experience, to help transform business process, to help transform organizations, and for they themselves to show and demonstrate that concept of adaptability. And in the survey, you saw a number of different concepts in terms of where the technology trends are going. That's where both students, and I would argue even the 50-year-olds have got to be more attuned to for their own personal sustainability and survivability.
And maybe the 60-year-olds and the 40-year-olds and the 30-year-olds as well. There you go. Thanks. Okay. Norbert, one other question from the internet?
Yeah, we have got another question from the internet on regulation. We have already touched this. So question is how regulation will impact especially the companies we have introduced in Europe. And yeah, coming from a member state of the EU, I think we know what regulation does mean. At this stage, there's a really serious, there are serious people who think, okay, banks, financial institutions, but also the energy sector is really affected by that. And 75% of the CEOs confirmed that regulation will have an impact on their business, so they are quite negative about the prospects on that. So 80%, for instance, confirmed that this will increase their costs. 50% told us, okay, this will have a negative impact in attraction of people, find the right skilled workers. And another portion of 40% told us, okay, this can have an impact on innovation, will probably hinder innovation. So all in all, big fear, big concern that this will have another drive. And especially from the German perspective, I can tell you that 2 weeks ago, the German Bundespräsident, he challenged our new government in telling them, okay, please be aware of this negative impact of regulation. Please be aware that there has to be some space for some industry to develop their business further, especially in a global world. So,
appreciate that. Maybe one final question, if we have one. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Masaki Kondo, Jiji Press Japanese News Agency. I understand that this study was conducted for CEOs, but I'm just curious. Do you think the confidence was shared by employees in these companies? Because here the study says more CEOs are willing to hire people, but are they hiring people as a normal positions or part-time? Because every year I feel different gap between what I feel and what I hear in Davos. So can you elaborate a little bit more about this? Thank you.
So it's a great point. I mean, you know, first off, I would say at least over the last 4 or 5 years here in Davos, the conversation around confidence levels has not been all that great. In fact, if you go back 3 years ago, it was pretty disparaging in terms of how the business community was actually thinking about where the recovery stood and how long it was going to take to get it back on track. So from my perspective anyways, I think the confidence levels that we're beginning to see is certainly not where it has been pre-financial crisis, but it's clearly starting to move in the right direction. I think the second point, though, to make is that at the end, if CEOs are actually looking at business prospects in a more positive way over the next 12 months, you would expect this to continue to cascade down into their organizations, either through investments, through hiring plans, changes to the business, and start to have a more positive effect on how their employees ought to be looking at the potential for that particular organization, and maybe how they're thinking about the path to economic recovery. So I think it's early days, to your point. It doesn't surprise me that there's a gap, and it'll be interesting to see if we're together a year from now going through this as to, one, what do confidence levels actually look like, and how collectively do the broader population really feel about the economic recovery. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you all for being here this evening. Thanks for those that have been on the webcast. Appreciate your questions. And obviously, a lot of great information in the survey. Encourage you to take a look at it, use it accordingly, and many of us will be around for a little while to answer any more of your questions. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you.